just while Marco's getting everything ready, a quick intro. Hacktoberfest coming up in October. GitLab, as have been for previous number of years, a part of the event. But there's a few websites that provide a nice way of finding projects and finding issues to work on that don't currently pull from GitLab. So Nick's done some of the I don't know what you want to call it, initial work to see like what data we need to get out of GitLab, and provided some GraphQL queries, I think, to get some of that data out. We're going to have a quick look to see if we can make an attempt at sort of integrating that into the project so they can pull that data directly out of GitLab. I should have hit stream as well, shouldn't I? Maybe I'll just upload the recording afterwards so I don't have to redo that intro.
Okay. Okay, I'm good. Let's start sharing my screen. Share my screen. Okay. And you can see it, right?
I can indeed. So yeah, first issue.
So let's try and get at least the environment, development environment set up for this project, which is first issue, which, as Lee mentioned, is one of the ways that the Hacktoberfest is going to basically let participants discover projects and issues to work on.
Okay. And you just flick, you've got the actual website open there as well, right? On the other tab, just give us a sneak peek. But yeah, so we can see languages.
Yeah, exactly.
Projects, and then I guess if you drill down into a project, it then give you.
Oh, this is a link to a project.
Oh, okay. So I wonder why.
Oh, and in here, oh, okay. So maybe, yeah, if you click on the card, this is showing a couple.
Perfect. Love it.
Okay.
So the other thing I'm interested in, sorry, I know it's very hard to multitask when you're driving, but I'm interested to understand whether like this is happening real time, or is there something that is like a scheduled, like a polling type thing that runs and pulls information from all the data sources and like stores it somewhere locally? Do you know the answer to that, or? I
never had a look at this code before, so no.
Okay. I think it might run it on like a schedule or something, because I think there's a generate or generator.ts or something that we were looking at. And I can't imagine it could pull all this data that quickly real time.
Well, there's actually one way to find out.
Exactly. While you're doing that, I just need to get a top up, and then you can tell me the answer when I get back. I won't be set.
Yeah.
Right. Sorry, what did you find?
It's statically generated on schedule.
Okay. Perfect.
Because like you mentioned, the generate script is basically generating this JSON, and I had a look, and it contains all the projects and data for issues and stuff like that.
Cool, but presumably, well, not presume. If I feel like that generated JSON shouldn't be in the repository or
No, from what I understood, it's in here just for development purposes.
cool, perfect. It could
Uh,
always be a dummy one, couldn't it, with just some dummy projects and
Yeah, because like on how to set up the project locally, you can use the included generated JSON as a dummy data, or you can
cool.
npm run pre-build, but I need also a GitHub personal access token.
Awesome. Cool.
So that also means that we probably will need to set up some GitLab personal access token. So we will see. Let's try.
Yeah, I guess it depends. I'm thinking that actually we can the GraphQL queries actually
Oh,
don't need authentication, so might be
true.
onto a winner. But I know
Yeah.
rate limiting is a bit different depending on whether you're authenticated or not.
True, but if it's something that runs on a schedule like once every hour, that shouldn't hit any rate limit.
Yeah, I'm more thinking if our GraphQL query says that there's 1,000 pages of projects that are public, then it's the time it takes, or sorry, the number of GraphQL calls to page through those 1,000 pages. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah.
But anyway, let's get stuck in then, I guess.
Yeah, so following the guide, let's fork this project. Perfect. And then I just need to, for the project, clone it and create the branch. Okay. And then, okay, it's just a matter of npm install and npm run dev. So let's clone this locally. Install. Quite a lot of errors, actually. Warnings.
Yes, that's the problem of not having things like Renovate Bot or whatever it might be running on like these small little repositories that probably don't get a lot of love.
Yeah, probably. The zoom bar always. Okay, yeah, it did finish. So now let's try npm run dev.
Oh,
Ooh, maybe it's better if I.
have you got GitLab running on that port?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, it's running. Okay, try again.
Nice.
It's working.
Great job.
So now we should have a look at how the generation stuff works.
Yeah, so could you find the issue actually if you haven't found the issue in the GitHub repository, especially as Nick's done some of the groundwork of putting the GraphQL query together. The good
Yeah.
thing is we almost don't need to worry about 90% of the project, including like the web server that you're running now, right?
Yeah.
The important bit is just the generate script, I guess, that generates the JSON.
Yes. So project license.
So the terminology might not be exactly whatever, but so it pulls data from GitHub using, I think it's like a library or an SDK or whatever you want to call it, a wrapper around the API, which is called OctoKit.
Yeah.
So I guess like we don't have a JavaScript, a node package or whatever you want to call it for consuming the GitLab GraphQL API. So we'll need to use something a bit more raw. And I think, as Nick mentioned, something in here.
This one.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I mean, I've not looked at this. I don't know what it is, but I guess it's a node package for consuming GraphQL. Yeah, so we'll need to do a bit of learning.
Schema, new GraphQL schema. How do we get the schema though? So I guess we could, so let's have a look at this. This is using OctoKit. Why can't we use AutoKit though? The only GitHub related thing that I see is the access token.
Maybe we can. I mean, do you want to Google OctoKit? I thought OctoKit was a wrapper for the GitHub GraphQL API. But maybe it's not. If you Google it and it's just a GraphQL thing, then we're all good.
Oh yeah, official client for GraphQL.
yeah. So I don't think it will do what we want.
No. So let's see, OctoKit. This is, where is this? Get repositories. This is preparing the query, validating the query, and this is calling the OctoKit. Okay. So
I almost wonder whether we should create an entirely new file and this one becomes generate GitHub and our one becomes generate GitLab because
yes and no, because I think that we might get away with just getting repositories from GitHub and GitLab and then put them all together and let it do what. Sorry. A really bad day today.
Just open it up on my end in a minute as well.
Yeah, because there's kind of quite a bit of logic that we don't really want to rewrite. I think that we could get away with changing get repositories to get GitHub repositories. And then create a get GitLab repositories.
Oh. Have you ever written TypeScript before?
Yep.
You have?
Yeah.
Good. You can teach me a thing or two then.
Where is here? Receive the list of repositories by calling GitLab GraphQL API. Use
You know the link. Nick's put it in the issue as well if you want to copy and paste it. But...
GraphQL Explorer. I've written it a few times, so I know that.
Yeah.
GitLab. To build and test, get GitLab, and then we have fun. So I guess we first need to bring in the GraphQL, this one. Okay. So let's have a look at this. How does it work? Complete documentation. Prerequisites, writing code, build schema, but construct a schema using GraphQL schema language. I guess we do have an endpoint to get the GitLab GraphQL schema.
Yeah, it's God. I want to say I know what it's called. Oh God, it begins with an I. In introspection, it's an introspection query. But the problem is it's absolutely enormous, and I wonder if we actually want all of it or whether I don't know if we have a choice.
If we get the official one, we are safe from breaking changes. Kind of.
Yeah, I don't know. Put it this way, I've got a feeling it's 5 meg.
Well, that's okay. So you were mentioning
And wouldn't you need a schema in order to get the schema, like a schema? Because the way you get the schema is by making a GraphQL query.
No, I don't think that's. Nope. I actually verify against the feature deprecation. You know what? I guess we can have a look at the reactive tools, because I think that Raymond worked on this and actually downloaded the schema.
Yes, although I don't think we included it in the end. But if you find the MR, you might be able to find an old commit with it in. But it's
Yes.
constantly changing. I don't know.
No,
I'll do some research while you're looking for that. I'll do some research.
Yeah, I'm not actually interested in the file. I'm more interested in the link to get the schema.
There's not a link. That's the point.
Oh.
Ruby makes a GraphQL query to the GraphQL API that returns the schema. I'm fairly confident that that's how it worked anyway.
Did Raymond close his?
It's been merged, I think.
Oh, okay. Author Ray. Add GraphQL client.
I'd be, I know it's going to be a bit painful and a bit manual, but I'd be tempted for us to define the schema ourselves, just for exactly the fields we want. And we could even start with a really simple query, like remove a lot of the stuff if we want, just to see if we can, like, can we get TypeScript or JavaScript or Node or whatever it's called, can we get it to make a GraphQL query and get a bit of data back? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's one way to do it.
So in the GraphQL, that's the only thing they.
So we need this schema and GraphQL to make the call.
The only thing I'm a bit unsure of, their example here is, I don't know what we'd call it, like one-dimensional. I'd like to see an example of a schema that has I don't know what to call it, like nested objects, I think.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I was reading. I didn't fully heard you.
So I'm just having a look. So the example on the GraphQL JavaScript documentation of the schema is just a bit too basic. It basically just has a string. Hello as a string. Now, we could guess, but we could do with just a bit more, like we want to see how you have, like, okay, I think our query is going to return maybe projects, but then projects is an object, right? So how do we then do the next layer down?
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
So like this gets us started, but all we need is an example of a slightly more complex schema.
Yeah, let's see, GraphQL schema example.
Yeah, but I know what the schema looks like, but I don't know what the TypeScript version of it looks like, if you know what I mean.
But you don't have to create it in TypeScript. Like here, this is a string.
Oh, okay.
That's
right.
why...
So if instead of string we put something and then below it we put type something, okay, cool, perfect, easy.
Yeah, I was actually having a look in here, like book and then type,
perfect.
author.
Okay, gotcha. Thanks, Marco.
Yeah. So
right. So should we look at Nick's query, paste it into graphical and just reduce it down to much less, if that makes sense? What I'm curious about is whether you need to define like the arguments and everything else as well.
there are no arguments in here, but we will need to provide.
Well, they're not variables, but they are arguments. You know, do we have to tell it that the projects accepts arguments, these are the arguments accepts, and these are the type? But let's start with
let's get only the first 10.
well, I would remove the arguments even entirely to start with, like get rid of the brackets and just return projects, nodes, and name. Keep it really sort of.
Well, we can keep those.
Okay. And maybe, like I say, get rid of the arguments maybe as well, or? Well, no, actually, let's keep those. So that will tell us whether or not we need to define those arguments.
Yes.
So, if you bring your Visual Studio Code, can you have them side by side somehow, or do you want to send me the query so I can run it and I can talk you through the definition? Or
I think we can do this and this.
nice, perfect.
That and this.
Maybe get rid of your file browser on the left-hand side. That'll help.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So we actually need the schema. Let me have a look how they were. Okay.
I wonder if your code suggestions might help us as well.
Oh, that would be nice. With schema, and now it's really a matter of creating the schema. So
we've always got type query at the top.
Yeah. Type query. Then we have
projects.
Oh, okay. So
now this is where I don't know. Yeah, or is it? Or is it actually an array of nodes? Hopefully it's an array of.
Oh,
I think it might be an array. Oh no. No, I think it might return a project connection.
true. Oh god.
I'll keep Googling to see if I can find a schema to sort of get a bit of a feel for it. But yeah, I think it returns a single project connection, and a project connection has an array of nodes.
Yeah, probably.
Although that had an array, didn't it? An author has an array of books. So maybe it does. Maybe it does take care of the node stuff for you.
I don't think so, because we have the connection built right for that, because we can put other things before the nodes. Like, okay, we have an array of projects.
Right. Yeah. Like total time spent, you mean?
Exactly.
So you think this GraphQL API doesn't return nodes? You think it just returns?
You know what? I think that this, we have type project connection. Projects is just a project connection.
Yeah.
Here we have nodes, which are a list of
bingo. Yeah.
Why do we have to do this manually?
I honestly think it's for the best, because the whole schema for the GitLab GraphQL API is obscene, and I don't think that we want all the mutations and everything else in there. So it's painful, but I think it's for the best.
Type project, and here we have name string star count. Is it number? Oh, web URL.
Let's go for in.
Well, kind of. Kind of. Web URL is right. Open issues count. Last activity. Oh, and last activity is a string. Issues count is int.
Do you think it's a string though?
Looking at this, yeah.
I just think that it represents a date.
That represents a date, but in JSON you have strings, you don't have dates.
Oh, so you think that the schema is just the JSON schema?
Yep.
Okay.
So we have query project connection, project connection has nodes of project. Project has name, start count, open issue count, last activity at, web URL. Okay. Is this, oh, this is a sync. So task. Was it like that? I don't remember. Promise. Task is a C#. Okay, we have the schema now. GraphQL schema source root value provides a resolver function for each API endpoint. This is the server side stuff though, but we and oh maybe
Oh, is this not the library we want? Is this a library to build a GraphQL server, not a GraphQL client?
let's see. Types, TypeScript, GraphQL client library. Can we use Apollo?
Possibly.
Is that overkill? As your application grows, GraphQL user steps. System, define database field in GraphQL schema. Setting up the project. This is schema URL of your GraphQL API. This assumes that you files on top level directory, documents, generates. This is oh, GraphQL code generator automatically creates a GQL function from This function enables us to type the variables that go into our React hooks along with the results from those hooks. Apollo client, GraphQL query. This loading data. Oh, so maybe we can use this, but we have to generate this thingy.
Well, if we're using Apollo, then we know how to use it because we use it in the GitLab repository, right? So we don't need to define a schema.
I don't think that's really it. Code gen. So I think this is basically top level directory. I need this in top structure. Because I think this basically calls the GraphQL endpoint to get the whole schema and generates this thingy inside generated. And then you can use this to actually run the query.
But we know we don't need that, don't we? For Apollo, right? We know because we use Apollo and we know it doesn't do an introspection query every time we want to query, like for your forks button that you migrated to GraphQL, it just makes the query and gets a response back. It's happy, right?
Yes, but since we don't need any authentication and stuff like that, can't we just make a post call?
We can, yeah, if we want to, but then we've got to handle things like pagination. Like, I don't know if any of that's handled. I suppose it's not really, is it? Yeah. Do you know what? Oh, you've seen my Ruby scripts that I write, yeah? And
Yeah.
they're all just making post calls to the GitLab GraphQL API. I haven't felt the need to use a GraphQL library because it just makes life harder. So if you're in agreement, I'm all for taking that approach.
Yeah, I think that's easier because we don't need the schema.
Well, I don't think we do. Like, if we can use Apollo, I'm pretty sure we don't need the schema for that either. But I do think it adds a level of complexity that we just don't need.
Yeah, like if we simply run a fetch on, no, we need to do
A post. Yeah.
and that's basically just giving us JSON.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what if JavaScript make
So should we use Axios or
there's actually, I don't know if we can, yeah, with fetch. This is built in inside of JavaScript.
oh, cool. Cool.
So I
That'll
think
do. Nice.
at least for a test, let's see if we do await fetch. So HTTPS. No, this is API/GraphQL to make the call. Then we pass method post.
Yeah, this is 100 times easier.
Absolutely. Except why don't I just copy and paste?
I would try. Don't even bother with headers. Like
Okay.
if we don't get back what we want, we had.
Um,
Oh no, actually, do you remember on my pairing? Yeah, we had to. The content type is necessary, but except isn't necessary.
yes.
Because we're not actually sending JSON, are we? We're sending some bizarre.
No, we are sending JSON.
Oh yeah, because the GraphQL query is actually encapsulated inside of the JSON.
Stringify. What's trying to suggest us in there? It's kind of right. So if we, oh, because we do need the query field.
Yeah. Query contains the query, which contains a query.
Yes. So this is almost good. So we have query projects. Let's copy
and paste. Yeah.
this.
I would. Oh yeah. Yeah.
So that
So you need one more closing.
One more
curl,
closing,
then
then
your closing backtick.
yeah. And that's it.
Yeah, yeah, I think so.
Yeah, this is calling the stringify. This is called closing the fetch. Okay. So wait. Oh.
So is there a nice easy way to run this, or how to
That's the next thing that I want to have a look at. So we could, where was it? Get GitHub repositories. If we do get GitLab repositories, wait, let's do this, and do this. Come on, this is an array of repository model. Okay. Okay, so now how do we run this? Let's have a look at the documentation. And this is not the documentation, but this one is. So, oh, okay. You can run npm run prebuild to fetch the latest data from GitHub. So if we skip the GitHub part, we might be good to just do this pre-build. Fetch is not defined. Because fetch is a browser thing.
right? So Axios is what we used to use in GitLab, and I've used elsewhere.
Yeah, but Axios is like
Is it overkill? Is it?
yeah, but not the global fetch variable is available on Node.js starting at version 18. We are in 16. So let's try installing Node Fetch.
Cool.
Let's remove GraphQL because we don't need it.
Yeah.
npm install say Node Fetch. Okay. So we don't need this, but we need fetch probably. Like that. Maybe. . What's that?
Feels like a bit of a weird unrelated issue, doesn't it? Or
Not fetch. Let's see at this library documentation because npm init install not fetch. Oh, yeah. I thought we were missing this. The type definitions, basically.
sure.
Instead, change the require of index.js inside it to a dynamic import available in common.js. This is not good. Maybe should we just try with Axios?
Oh, should just gonna do one more Google. Lightweight TypeScript HT post.
And then to make the call, Axios post user. Okay. Axios post that. This. Let's try with this. Yeah, this is working. It's
Wow, that's easy, wasn't it?
yeah. Okay. Data projects. So if we do data.projects,
Projects, should it be?
oh yeah, good point. Undefined.
What's the chunks that it's talking about?
I think that there are 53 different projects to fetch from, repositories.
But doesn't it get the list of repositories from the GraphQL query?
No, because okay, first issue dot repositories, it splits it up into chunks. Then for each chunk, they are calling basically getting the list of data for each repository.
So does it get the list of repositories first, and then for each repository it gets a list of issues, or
No, this is actually
hard coded?
from here. These are
See, this is what I said to Nick on our call. When did we have a call? I'm sure we had a call at some point, and I said, "Oh, isn't this hard coded?"
These are hard coded. The
Yeah.
projects are list.
So you have to come and add your project to this list, which makes life even easier, right? If all we've got to do is fetch issues for each of the projects.
Yes, because we are not fetching all the projects with those labels. We tell which projects we want to include, basically.
Yeah. I mean, there's an argument that it might be nice to get a list of all projects, or even
Uh,
do it maybe by group rather than by project or something like that. But
but that would change. At least I would keep it simple for now.
yeah, I agree. I agree. We'll just add like GitLab, and we'll add. Do you want to use what's it called? Camel case? Is that more popular in JSON? I don't know. Actually, scroll down to the bottom of the file. There's some other things at the bottom, aren't there?
Labels.
None of them have got none of them have got two words. You know what I'm saying? I think this. Would you say the standard in like JSON and JavaScript world is camel case rather than snake
Yeah,
case?
yeah, and actually, I think that this should be tweaked because I might want to set labels to find the queries on a per project basis. These are growing.
Again, though, let's do baby steps.
Oh yeah, that for sure. So,
What about all I'm trying to think is
ooh, no,
should we have the labels defined? So you have a GitLab section that has repositories and labels, and then a GitHub section that has repositories and labels.
uh, probably the bad thing is that this is a whole set. I think that we should this won't be this straightforward because we have to basically get this whole logic into a function
Yeah,
and then call that logic for the GitHub repository and for the GitLab repository.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, that's doable. That's not something that I have time to do it now, though.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
Maybe we could just write like a quick couple of notes on the issue, just regarding sort of progress. Um,
yes, yes,
just to sort of say that the library links appears to be for building a GraphQL server, not a GraphQL client. Um,
yeah.
we tried to use Fetch, but it's not available. Axios seems to work nicely. Actually, the list of projects is hard coded, etc.
The GraphQL.js library. Let me type. To simply find things such as to the GitLab endpoint. using Axios. Then we will need to extract the logic that iterates over the set of repositories into its own function. Then call it
But before that, I would state that actually the list of repositories is hard coded. It doesn't pull
the list of projects repositories is not hard coded inside the right? We will have to change it to contain GitHub repositories and GitLab repositories. We will need to send the repository over the set of repositories into its own function and call it twice. One this is pretty much it, I guess.
so it's not the right library. Projects are hard coded. We need to change that. Maybe part of that, do you want to say that that might be our opportunity to have a separate label, like to define labels within, like, because I was thinking rather than having GitHub repositories and GitLab repositories, I was thinking having GitHub and GitLab. And within GitHub, you have repositories and labels. And within GitLab, you have repositories and labels. I'm sort of not 100% on that, but just thinking that we've already got a label. I know it's a bit cheeky because we're just one repository on GitLab.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether that's technically the right approach or whether there should be a standard across all platforms and all repositories that this is the label to use.
An array of, no, this is not even an array. This is GitLab repositories tables. Let's see. Okay, that's good. Like that.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, sounds good.
Awesome. Really appreciate that, Marco.
Oh, no worries. I
Cool.
might try, since I already have forked this project. I could, because today I don't think I will have time to, but
I'm just
tomorrow,
gonna stop the recording if that's all right.
yeah.